Greetings, everyone. Happy Columbus Day from the Missouri Institute of Mental Health here in St. Louis, Missouri. My name is Tom Pansella with MIMH. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We are doing a program on compassion fatigue, and this is kind of a preview program, kind of an abbreviated version of a program that's been going around Missouri. We just started last week. We've got a few more programs coming up. If you're in or near Missouri and are interested in it, there's a link on this webpage to the registration information for that program. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you've joined us before, welcome back. It's always good to see how quickly these programs are growing in popularity. If you have questions during today's program, there is a link that says Questions for Speaker, email questions for speaker. That's underneath the video window. Please use that to submit your questions. We'll ask them on your behalf at the end of today's program. If you would like CEUs for this program, there is a link to purchase CEUs underneath the video window as well. You may use that at any time. We'll also keep that link active for a little while after the program. The speakers have provided their slides to us for you to open up in a pop-up window. There's a link for that as well, and you can right-click on that and download that if you need to page through that later on, but we've got that available to you as well. And so I'd like to introduce Nancy Spargo and Ryan Lindsay. They are the co-founders of the St. Louis Center for Family Development. Nancy is the executive director and Ryan is the clinical director. Nancy spent the last 29 years working with abusive family systems. She trained as a clinical social worker and family therapist, and she provided direct service to a variety of populations, including immigrants and refugees, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered, and homeless youth and adults until moving to St. Louis in 2003. Her career is characterized by systems integration and program development for marginalized population with a focus on trauma. She's worked with the child welfare, mental health, domestic violence, and substance abuse systems. Ryan has extensive experience working with individuals with emotion dysregulation disorders and the use of dialectical behavioral therapy. And he spent the bulk of his career utilizing mindfulness-based treatments for the treatment of psychological and emotional distress. His past positions include co-founding the Ann Arbor DBT Center, team leader of a multifamily DBT program for adolescents, and work with chronically mentally ill populations. Nancy, Ryan, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. So the first thing that we probably should let everybody know is that this really is a workshop that we do that typically we have a hard time fitting everything into 3 hours. So this is going to be a new experience for us trying to get it down within the hour. So appreciate your patience in advance. Ryan and I started a social service agency back in January of this year called the St. Louis Center for Family Development. And we started this agency in an attempt to fill some of the gaps within the social service delivery systems, especially the mental health. Our services are characterized by trauma-informed services. We use the constructs from several evidence-based models, and we are trying to serve populations that typically are underserved. So that's a little bit about what we're about. Did I leave anything out with that?
Nope, I think you got it.
So we are a little bit of a tag team here in terms of our presentation as well as running our social service agency, and want to talk a little bit about why compassion fatigue is so important to us. And the reason that it's important is because it's actually something personal for both of us. We each have a story to tell. Probably a lot of you have a story to tell. For Ryan and I, it was literally out of the gate that we developed our stories. I had an undergrad degree in sociology and Spanish and didn't know what to do with it, and so I got involved in an internship program that sent me to the port of entry for the newly immigrated Mexican community in Chicago. And there I landed at a grassroots social service agency, and we served women with domestic violence, we served women with crisis pregnancies, and runaway youth. And long story short, about 6 months into my first position, because I was hired on, the executive director was asked to leave due to a political conflict with the board. Her staff left in solidarity with her, and I became the acting social service director at 21 ripe years of age. So I was managing state grants, I had a shelter, I was hiring staff, I was supervising students, I was firing staff, I was totally totally a paraprofessional, having no formal training in domestic violence, runaway. I didn't have any formal training in anything other than schoolwork in sociology and Spanish. And so, needless to say, I never did anything that I wasn't doing at least 3 things at once. I developed a startle response to the French fry timers at McDonald's and other fast food kinds of restaurants, and I came really close to burning out. So that's a little bit about how compassion fatigue became important to me and why it is so much of a priority and has been throughout my career.
And my story is a little bit different. I was trained at the University of Michigan Department of Psychiatry. So I was trained in this, I got my master's of social work degree from the University of Michigan, and I trained in this fantastic training program. Now, all of you who either have been in academia or maybe have heard about academia is very competitive. And so I was trained, you are really rewarded for successes, but they didn't teach you about how to manage anything else. So in that, what happened was I had my internship and I had a postmaster's fellowship, and I was working, and I fell into the profession doing treatment of borderline personality disorder. And so I, going into the profession, had no idea what borderline personality disorder was, let alone the impact of that and the difficulty. But, being young and energetic, I was like, bring on the most difficult, and that's what I did. And I took on the most difficult clients, and no matter where I worked, that's what I did. And so I left my professional training and I got out into the world, a year short of licensure. And I landed myself a job at an outpatient mental health clinic. It was a for-profit clinic, and it was really based on however many people you saw, that's how much money you got paid. So number one, they rewarded you for seeing more people. So they rewarded you for not sticking to limits and paying attention to yourself. And then second to that, they were really about profit. And for me, that was very difficult because that's what my supervision was focused on. Did you get your paperwork done, and do you get those authorized sessions in? With no ability to recognize that, oh wait, I was seeing 30 to 35 people in individual therapy a week for an hour each and having to manage 40 to 50 people's caseloads, or a caseload of 35 to 40 people, and their mental health benefits, and having to write treatment plans and all of that other kind of stuff, which all of us probably are aware of the difficulties of paperwork anyways. But what happened was I was treating a very difficult population, and I didn't have a supervisor that was actually in tune at all to what my own internal experience was. I just assumed I was just right out of school, so I'm like, oh, I should be able to do all of this. I should be able to see 25 borderlines in 1 week, and a bunch of other disorders in 1 week, and I should be able to manage that and everything else. Well, eventually my whole life started to break down in the sense that I almost left the profession because my relationship suffered. I got home, I didn't want to talk to anybody. Don't you dare call me on my phone because I'm not going to answer. Emotionally I shut down, and I was definitely not there for my clients. And I noticed that after I left that job, and the clients that actually came with me when I left that job, people got better because I actually was more present as opposed to completely fatigued. And I was beyond fatigue, I was at burnout. So for both me and Nancy, this was something that really impacted our lives, and it was very early on. And I think it's so important that we start talking about this, and this is why we are talking about it today, because we want to make sure that people early in their career don't burn out before their potential has been maximized. That's the biggest problem that goes with the loss of people in our profession, is that if you leave after only 2 years into the profession, what about the next 30 years of potential and growth of that person and the impacts that is lost? Not to mention the financial piece, but that's not quite as important.
Well, and we want, even those of us, like I said, I've been in the field for quite some time. I want to stay in the field. I want to keep going. I want to be able to take care of myself in such a way that I can then train and take care of other people at a professional level. So hopefully we've got something for everybody. Mm-hmm. And we're going to move on here a little bit to talk about the history and the research. First of all, you need to know that it wasn't until 1992 that that the term was coined, and it was by a nurse in a nursing journal that compassion fatigue first came out. So we're talking about something that's relatively new in terms of as a theoretical construct. Partly because of that, there is very little research that has been done on compassion fatigue. Charles Figley is kind of the guru. He's written most extensively. He has books, lots of journal articles that you will find. But there is no hard data as to, the attrition in the field, as to what the costs are. It's just not there. The research hasn't been done yet. So even though it's relatively new and it's grown really, really fast, we have a long ways to go in terms of looking at compassion fatigue as a risk, a professional risk to what we're doing in our careers. So we know, what things do we know in terms of compassion fatigue? We know that empathy, which is what we have to have in order to be effective with our clients, is something that actually puts us at risk. We know that exposure to a lot of trauma, and certain kinds of trauma, or even worse, we'll get into that in a little bit, are certainly factors that will put you at risk. When you are isolated at a professional level, that will put you at higher risk. We know, so basically, without going into the whole explanation, we know that there are certain things that create vulnerabilities for you, and we know that there are certain things that will help protect you and to be healthy and safe.
And we're going to talk about some of that stuff today.
So just a couple definitions. A lot of people get confused. We've got compassion fatigue, we've got secondary post-traumatic stress disorder, and we've got burnout. So believe it or not, they really are separate things. They get used interchangeably a lot, but they really are different. Compassion fatigue is actually kind of we should change the slides. Compassion fatigue is actually a syndrome. It's a normal response to doing the job that we do. And I like to think of compassion fatigue as a continuum. It's not like burnout where it's a point that you reach and you're done and you need a vacation, if not a new career. Compassion fatigue is really, it's a continuum, and it's something that you monitor at any given time. We always carry a little bit of compassion fatigue at any given time, and it's about figuring out how big or little that compassion fatigue is for us at any given point in time. What is it today? How good or tired are you feeling at this specific time? So it's really about getting tired. It's about getting worn down. And then you move into the secondary traumatic stress disorder. I'll change that. And secondary traumatic stress disorder is a real disorder. It's not a syndrome. It is the exact same criteria that you would use for post-traumatic stress disorder, only for somebody who's hearing the story of the person who's been traumatized. So, what kind of event it is, if it's a specific kind of event, it may be cumulative, but it frequently is one thing that will cause a post-traumatic stress disorder, and the same thing with secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. And then you get to the big kahuna, the burnout.
Where I was at.
And burnout is burnout's not about your clients, right? It's about your job. Burnout's about the organization. Burnout is about multiple factors all put together. So it usually is something that is cumulative. It's not something like secondary post-traumatic stress disorder that can happen from one day to the next. It's inclusive of things like paperwork, about not getting supervision, about having unrealistic expectations at work, not having the resources. It's really about the big picture. And so you're putting out, and you're not getting your needs met. That's the danger of burnout. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think of all of this on a continuum. And they're all related, and usually people that are burnt out have compassion fatigue and have been fatigued for a long period of time. But people can be fatigued and not burnt out. And people can be burnt out and not have secondary traumatic stress disorder. And so there are different components to the same kind of spectrum of of fatigue. I think of it as a compassion fatigue spectrum. So, some of the symptoms, what are we going to be looking for? So, there's different levels of symptomology here. It's going to hit biological. So we know from research that chronic states of stress cause lower immune system responses. So you have biological changes. You have also then within yourself anxiety responses. You have an emotional context where emotionally you may become completely non-present, unfeeling, and really apathetic in the work that you do. Behavioral, you might have lots of different kinds of behavioral responses, meaning that you may cope with certain behaviors. You may actually act out at work. And all these things also impact your relationships. That's one of the biggest impacts of compassion fatigue, and one of the biggest reasons that lead to dissatisfaction in a lot of relationships and the breakdown of relationships. And if you look at some of the research, there's huge rates of divorce within the social work population. Or if you're in a caretaking profession, there's very high rates of divorce. And so a lot of these things they're impactful in both internally and externally in your environments. And so these are the few things that I want you to kind of look at in terms of symptoms to notice either within yourself or the people you work for or work with. But the things that I want to kind of punctuate here are stuffing feelings is huge. When you try not to feel and you want to have completely void of emotions because to feel is too cumbersome to you, that's a huge sign, especially if before you actually did have emotions. The diminished feelings of self-worth, meaning that you're starting to not trust your own ability and you start to question your own just your effectiveness as a professional. Huge things.
The value of your work.
Exactly. If you're seeing people excessively complaining, which is a huge... Sometimes we have lots of things to complain about. In fact, in our profession, there's more things to complain about most of the time than a lot of other times. So, but when people who are oftentimes optimistic, and those are the people that you go to a lot to build motivation, and then all of a sudden they're complaining a lot about things that they didn't do before. That's a huge sign. Additional ones, it starts to affect your sleep patterns. So if you're sleeping way too much, so during my burnout time, because I was so burnt out, I had no energy to do anything. So my symptoms were physical in the sense that I had no energy at all, and I just wanted to sleep all the time. I didn't want to wake up in the morning and go to work. Partially it was due because I lived in Michigan, and in Michigan there's no sun for 10 months out of the year anyways, but I didn't notice that until I moved out. But a big thing is that was something that it affected me. Other people may not be able to sleep at all. So my response was that I slept all the time. So there's a bunch of other personal expressions of potential symptoms, but really it's about cluster. And the things that you really want to think about and look at is, am I experiencing life differently? Am I starting to view life differently? Or do you notice in a coworker that they are coming in different each day? Are they behaving in ways that they normally do not? Are they having emotional outbursts, or are they completely withdrawn from any conversation? So these are big things to be aware of.
You're further along on that continuum when you're glad that your client doesn't show up for an appointment, or
Yes.
when you don't find your client at home. When something cancels in your day and you feel relieved, that's not a good sign. And I think we always hear we have to take care of ourselves to take care of somebody else. But oftentimes, the more behind we get, the more we speed up, and the more we work and we work and we work, and that just kind of feeds itself. Mm-hmm. So, it's really easy to get away from exercise routines or eating healthy,
Yes.
eating right, that kind of stuff, and it really makes it hard to take care of somebody else like that.
Exactly. So compassion fatigue, though, is not limited to one's own personal experience. It's systemic, so it trails off into the organization. There's somebody who came in there crawling on the ground. So you hit it at the personal level, but also at an organizational level, you can notice where compassion fatigue is taking place, or it's got its feelers out there, or it's starting to take hold. So some of the big symptoms of that is if you see, and if you're administrators, you'll notice that you'll have excessive absenteeism. So people being absent over and over and over again, and before they weren't. And it's kind of, you know, it's a one-day kind of thing. It's not like they're sick all the time, but they're calling in a lot. You know, even, and then at the administrative level, a lot of workman's comp claims. You know, that's a sign that there's something not going on. There's something going on that's not right. You know, a lot of us work in teams. So one of the big things that help keep us together and doing the work that we do is being able to rely on the colleagues and the people in our professional relationships to keep us doing what we're doing. Well, when you start actually seeing your teams erode and there's a lot of conflict and people kind of being pitted against each other, this is really toxic and it takes hold. And if one person is in a bad state, that can affect everyone. And so we're going to talk about organizational solutions later, but I mean, a huge piece to that is being able to kind of put together a team that supports each other.
And I think, well, I was just going to say in terms of, you know, recognizing in somebody else, oftentimes we don't recognize that we're moving along that continuum of compassion fatigue and that we're becoming fatigued. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I like to tell that story about how I was working for DCFS in Illinois, the Child Welfare Agency, and long story short, I had 4 car accidents in like 6 months period of time, none of which were my fault. None. What a coincidence. And, you know, the insurance said, I don't care if it's your fault, we're dropping you. So that was my 2x4. That was the, you know, it's like, okay, well, there's something funny going on here. Mm-hmm. I wasn't able to recognize that. I knew I was stressed. I knew I had a hard job. Did I recognize that I was becoming fatigued? Did I recognize that, you know, my functioning had been altered as a result? Not until I got dropped by my insurance company.
Exactly.
And so as co-workers, I think that's an opportunity for us to be able to kind of look out for one another. Mm-hmm. and to kind of raise that flag and say, hey, you're not acting yourself. Mm-hmm. That's not like you. And
in terms of my story with that, I wasn't aware of it until eventually I had to quit the job that I had because they decided that any kind of unauthorized visits we had were going to be our fault and we had to pay them for any money they missed. So I decided that was not the most productive and effective place for me to work, but I didn't know that I was so far on the burnt out list because I was so new in my career that I just assumed everybody does this, and everybody's this tired, and everybody feels the same way, and everybody doesn't want to go to work in the morning. So, but I didn't have anybody in terms of effective supervision when we talk about organization to actually reflect and ask me and kind of check in with me and seeing how I was doing. Again, this was an administration that was really focused on, did you get your paperwork done? And that's all.
Are you making money for us?
Are you making money for us? Or are you losing money for us? And if so, we're going to take your money if you do. So another big thing in terms of an organizational level is high turnover with staff. If you're seeing that you're having a high turnover in your staff, 2 things are going on, I think, is one, that's a really hard job, or a very thankless job, which all of us who work in this profession, we know that in the helping professions, we often do not get the appreciation that we deserve. And we do a lot of very hard work. And we don't tend to get, you know, vacations planned to us to go to some kind of conference. You know, we're not getting large bonuses. We're not getting the compensation. We're not getting the social recognition in many ways from others. And so if you don't compensate, I mean, then people are not going to stay in the profession. They have no incentive to stay in it because all it does is drain us, and then there's nothing, we're not getting anything back. So as helping professionals, we want to help, but we need reciprocity as well.
Just to interject a second, if you think about firefighters and police officers, public servants who are in a crisis-oriented kind of field, we're not all in crisis all the time. Our clients are not always in crises, but the bottom line is that we're all giving, we're all serving, we're all providing. And if you look at the recognition within our society for police officers and firefighters, there are separate organizations to support them, to raise money, to do all these things. It's a status. Mm-hmm. And how many people even know that there's such a thing as a social work day or a social work month? And if you're not a social worker, where does that leave the psychologists and the counselors?
Exactly.
I mean, it's like we don't get a lot of societal recognition. We don't have that status, yet we're putting our our emotions, our energy, and our investments into other people. And so just something to think about. It does take its toll. It does have an impact on us.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I think we should move on to vulnerabilities.
So this is probably one of the questions everybody wants to hear the answer to. Like, so what do I need to manage? How am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to avoid this? So the good news is that, yes, you can do things to avoid it. The bad news is that there are inherent risks to our profession. Like I said before, empathy. You have to be empathic. You have to be able to provide empathy to your clients, or you're not going to be effective. And so just by virtue of providing that empathy, that puts you at risk. Another thing is common to this field is a history of trauma. A lot of us come into the field for reasons of resolving something that we haven't been able to resolve before. For a lot of people, it's trauma. If you have a history of trauma and you're dealing with trauma, you're very likely to get triggered, very likely.
Or even if it's resolved, even if there is, we all come
true.
in,
You can still be
we've all
triggered.
experienced certain things, and so to be as empathic as most people that are in this profession, there's probably something that happened in our lives that said, hey, I want to actually help someone else because something's probably happened to us. And all of that puts us at risk because through life, we do relive these things.
Yeah. And then you have kids. If you're working with kids, that certainly is a much more vulnerable population. If you're dealing with life and death situations, that is certainly way more taxing than not. And for me, the big one in terms of our clients is how many times we work with clients and we can't create the safety that we need. We can't create the safety that our clients need. And so we know that, for example, a child is being abused, and for whatever reason, we are ineffective, unable to mobilize the necessary supports to make that abuse stop. It's really hard to keep going when you feel like something is happening that you can't change. And then at the professional level, it's, again, like you said, it's the professional environment. You have to be connected. You have to have support. And that's something that we really promote in terms of our social service agency. You really need that sense of connection. So if you don't have it in your office, then you develop it outside the office. You do what it's going to take to be connected. And then supervision. And as somebody who's worked in middle management many years and has been, an administrator and a supervisor and even had my own clients all in the same job, I know how many times it happened to me that I'm scheduled to see somebody for supervision and something happens administratively, and guess what? The supervision has to be canceled. It has to be rescheduled. That's really not the message we want to give, and it's really not fair to anybody involved. But the fact is that supervision takes a lot of work, and inadequate supervision is one of the big things that leads, I think, to compassion fatigue. So.
And adequate supervision takes specific kinds of skills and skill development. I know I've worked in community mental health systems, I've worked in big, large hospital systems, and oftentimes the supervisors in those positions aren't necessarily the most skillful. They usually, oftentimes, are in that position because they stuck it out the longest. They stayed and everybody else left. And that's not always the case, but oftentimes I have found that to be true. And so the people, especially if you're young in your career, when you come into this field, you're going to expect somebody with an expertise and a level of expertise that's going to be able to be aware and bring into your own awareness the levels of compassion fatigue and how that impacts your work on a daily basis.
So then, in terms of our responsibilities, what do you do to not end up with compassion fatigue? How do you avoid this kind of thing? Well, okay, so you think about the oxygen mask on the plane, and you think, okay, well, you have to put on your own mask before you can put on somebody else's. You have to take care of yourself first, right? But it's true, you do have to take care of yourself. And again, how hard is that to make that kind of commitment and to stick with it? If I were to think, I don't know about you, Ryan, but if I were to think about all the things I have to do today, and I'm a mom, I'm a professional, so I think about all the things I have to do today, and I list them out, and I were to mark next to each one which of these things is for me, which of these things is for somebody else. And I can tell you that as hard as I fight to take care of myself, the me list is going to be this long, and everybody else is going to be like this. And that's where I'm at in this stage of my life. And I have to fight. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning so that I can have this much me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even that much. You really have to be aware as to how much you're putting out, both in terms of yourself as well as somebody else, in terms of trying to achieve that ever elusive sense of balance that we need in our lives. Again, getting training, getting workshops, you're doing the right thing. You know, I don't know about everybody else, but training budgets are being cut left and right. And so people are expected to stay fresh and to stay vital and you know, enthusiastic and energized. And they're not getting anything new, okay? So we're getting cut, and expected to do more with less, which everybody already knows. And then the other thing is that going back to taking care of each other, I like to talk about sliming. I think that's up there in that slide. And some of you may not be familiar with this term. But basically, when you have a situation that's upsetting to you and you take it into supervision, supervisor, right, Mr. Supervisor here, the supervisor's prepared. You put on your armor, your emotional armor, so to speak, and you're ready so that people can come in and vent, so that they can debrief and process accordingly. Well, but how many times, you know, supervision is usually a scheduled thing. It's not like every day. It's not unless you're working in a fast-paced team. And so how many times something happens and without even thinking about it, you run into somebody, colleague, somebody in the field, and you want to get that off your chest because it's something that it's too heavy to carry around by yourself. And so you don't stop to ask, hey, do you have a minute? Can I tell you what happened? You don't ask permission to be able to do that. You end up many times sharing the whole story, the nitty-gritty detail, everything that is on your mind. You don't think twice about it, and you've just slimed your colleague. Okay? Because your colleague, number one, didn't get the choice as to whether that person was ready and or able to be able to soak that up and to act accordingly. You have just shared all this detail that probably wasn't necessary to be able to get the story across and to be able to process and vent for yourself. And so it's really, it's a unintended kind of thing where you're just trying to get support, you're trying to share with somebody that you think it would be meaningful, and in the end it's more of a burden that you're putting on your coworker. So that's kind of my pitch is we have to think about our coworkers when we're venting. We have to think about other people when we need to get things off our chest.
And ask if people are in that space. How many times are you sitting in your office and well, at least for me, and somebody comes in and just plops in your chair and says, I have to tell you this stuff, and I'm in the middle of doing something. I don't have time to switch gears. I'm not ready for that, and I may not actually want to hear it. And that's okay because I just had 5 of my own clients and I'm still debriefing that piece. So the idea is how do you make it structured and how do you ask permission? We're not saying don't go out and use your colleagues that way because we want to use colleagues in inappropriate ways. What we don't want to do is be a burden to others. So it's actually just about asking questions. And if they can't do it right then, hey, come back in about 15 minutes and we can talk about this. Or I've got time at 1:30, or let's go to lunch together and we can talk about it then. You know, it's making it structured and asking permission.
So, and I would challenge everybody to commit to taking care of yourself, me included, as well as I take care of everybody else. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do.
Exactly. So, we talked a little bit about vulnerabilities at a personal level, and, you know, barring time because we don't have all day to talk about everything, what I want to actually switch to is to talk a little bit about protective factors at an organizational level. And we feel that this is so important because it's setting an example from top down throughout. You're building a culture in your agency that respects their employees, that appreciates their employees, and also they want the employees to stay in the profession. So if you want to take stock of either You know, if you're a head of an organization or agency, think about, do we have these things in place? And if you work for an agency and says, does my agency have these in place? And if they're not, how do we get these things in place? So one of the biggest things that I highly promote, Nancy will attest to this, is adequate leave time. And actually taking that leave time.
But not everybody gets a monthly vacation.
That's
like Ryan.
True. I do go on vacation once a month, and it's very important to me to do that, and I'm not going to stop. But the reality is that there's so many people who have been in the profession actually many, many, many years, and they just don't take their vacation. I've had many people that have worked above me or equally as me, and I'm like, when are you going on vacation? They're like, I don't go on vacation. And they have this giant job bank built up. For what? I don't know. And what they're waiting on, I don't know. But the reality is that an organization and in the profession that we have, we need time to recover. We have emotions, we have experiences, and we are people, and so we need time to recover. That doesn't involve listening to stories of trauma or helping someone, constantly helping someone. And it's okay to need that, and it doesn't make us weak. I think a lot of us who are in this profession that think that we should just be able to do all of this. Well, I don't think we're actually designed to do all of this. And it's great that we do that, but we have to keep taking care of ourselves so that we can keep doing this. Another huge thing is prioritization of safety and personal well-being, meaning that from top down, you're always going to be concerned about what's the safety risks for the people that are out. We have an in-home service, so our workers are always out in the field. So what are the steps that we take to ensure that they are safe? You know, and one of those things is that we never allow a worker to go to a house by themselves, especially the first time. You know, eventually when you know there isn't safety concerns present, then you know that. We teach about safety concerns and safety, anything that's around safety. And then in terms of personal well-being, we promote taking your vacation. We promote taking care of yourself. We promote balancing your life. We don't want people always at work and then have to take 2 weeks off to recover. And then when they get back, not be recovered.
Well, and it means being flexible. I
Yes.
mean, if you don't, again, you don't take care of your employees, then the employees can't take care of the clients. You're just creating a vicious circle there.
And if your organization actually has training and they actually talk about compassion fatigue as something we are trying to prevent, I mean, then that's probably a fabulous organization. You probably want to stay there. But I'm pretty sure I never had, even in large systems, anybody ever talk to me about compassion fatigue so much. And it wasn't until I experienced things that it actually came into my awareness, hey, actually this makes sense. I can't do all of this. Nobody can. And if you can, that's someone else. But I don't have that energy and I don't have that ability to do that.
Maybe we should do a little survey to see how many people know about compassion fatigue
Exactly.
and how many people have ever been trained.
Or had a supervisor ask them about it or bring it up.
Right.
And then the next one is reasonable expectations. So we're all dealing with budget crunches. We are all dealing with, do a little bit more for less. And eventually, because we're so nice in our field oftentimes, we're just like, bring it on. I'm not going to say anything. And eventually you have all these tasks that you have to do that have either A, nothing to do with your work, or are the things that we actually cannot stand in the field. We're in this field probably because we like helping people, so that part we love. So that part is nice. But then you have all this other stuff that gets put on top of that, and expectations and deadlines and meetings and meetings and meetings. You know, all of those things take a toll on us. And then we start doing more. I'll join that committee because, you know, this person left the agency and they're not hiring somebody to replace them. You know, it's making the expectations reasonable. And what is reasonable for one person to be able to do and want to stay in this profession. And as administrators, you want to really think about that. When you ask somebody to take something else on, you want to make sure that, okay, is this reasonable to ask? And am I putting this person too much at risk? And I need to check in with them. And oftentimes it just comes from top down. Here, this is a requirement now. We got this to do. We got this to do. So those are some of the things that actually protect us. If you're talking about compassion fatigue, if you have effective leadership, if you have a culture that's been created of self-care, those things are great. And you have adequate leave time. You have adequate compensation, which in our profession, we never have adequate compensation. Let's be real. So the reality is that those are some of the protective factors. So we want to move a little bit into now creating personal solutions, what are things you can do individually to help prevent, and if you're in a place of compassion fatigue, what can you do? So Nancy, why don't you start doing this?
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure, Ryan. You know, I think for me it all starts with the organization. And so maybe that's because I'm an administrator at this point. Maybe that's because of some other reason. I have no idea. But we're really trying to have organizations that are going to support their staff for all these reasons that we've already listed. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can do as individual people. So, you know, we already talked a little bit about taking care of ourselves. You cannot underestimate, for example, the benefits of exercise. We have to get some physical exercise to be able to stay healthy. We have to be able to have time for ourselves on a daily basis. And again, sometimes you have to fight for that, but I personally think that it really has a lot of benefits if you can do that. I also think having some kind of a transition from your work day to your personal day. So, I mean, are you talking, we could talk listening to the radio on the way home. Maybe you have a book on tape, depending upon how far away you are from your office or where you have to work. I don't know. But like, I can tell a very short story about when I ran a sex abuse group, and it was an inpatient adolescent psych unit. And for whatever reason, we realized that about 90% of our kids were making outcries of sexual abuse once they were hospitalized. So we set up a whole program for sexually abused kids and started working with the police department and bringing in kids who were involved in sex rings, porno, that kind of stuff. And it's probably the hardest group I've ever done in my whole career. It was just a really emotionally laden group. So this wasn't about transitioning home at the end of every day. We actually built in going to dinner every week. It was on a Wednesday afternoon that we did these groups, and every day at the end of the day we would go to dinner, and frequently didn't talk about work at all, but just kind of had a separate time with people from work to then be able to transition home. That's a transition, okay? So it may be something really simple, and then again you may have to orchestrate something a whole lot bigger. You know, that list that I was just making a little bit earlier about the balance, how much for me and how much for everybody else, you might want to make that kind of a list. You might want to check it out and see, you know, how do you rate, and is that good enough for you? Is that the same kind of plan if you were to make a plan for somebody else? Is that the same kind of plan that you would make for somebody else that you love and care about? Or would you do it a little bit differently? And as a result, would you be willing to adopt that for yourself? What else?
A useful tool, which we usually do in longer workshops, is we use the Professional Quality of Life Inventory. Now, it's slipping my mind who developed that, but you can Google it or Bing it.
Or Bing it. It's called the ProQol, P-R-O-Q-O-L. And it's just a little
30 questions.
Inventory sheet that you can do at any given time. It's easily accessed on the web. And it just helps you figure out exactly what point you're at in terms of that continuum of compassion fatigue. So something to implement.
In former workshops, we've actually been people are surprised at how well they're doing. And they're usually so fatigued, they think, oh, I thought I'd be way worse on this. So moving a little bit to creating professional solutions, one of the things is trying to create diversification of the people that you're working with. So I started and kind of fell into this career tree in borderline personality disorder, and so that was a large part of my caseload. Now today, I'd actually probably prefer that. Most people probably think I'd be crazy for doing that, but the reality is that it's a population I love and I'm passionate about it, and I know a really good treatment for it. But the idea is that we want diversification, because if you work for a specific program that does treatment for sex abuse of children, that's a lot of trauma you're listening to over and over and over again all week long. So how do you figure out how to create diversification and so that things are a little balanced? So in a lot of the work that I try to do, I also try to balance that with people that are just having kind of life questions versus trying to stay alive. So balancing the different kinds of clients is really important. I promote attending trainings and workshops on a regular basis. I love to train, and I love to go to trainings. Trainings are those things that you want to go to a training where you feel invigorated and you're like, yes, now I can put this into action when I go home. Oftentimes that doesn't happen, but the reality is we want to look for good ones, and it is okay. And I know in our profession we don't always want to pay for things, and which is understandable because we like things for free and we don't get paid a lot.
We don't have big salaries.
We don't have big salaries. But the reality is that that's an investment in you, and that's an investment in your skill development, and that's an investment in your future. So I look at it as, yes, this is money out of my pocket, but it's also investing in me and developing skills so that I can actually stay in this profession for my career the way that I want to stay in this profession.
And that works out really well for me as your business partner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you don't want me quitting on you.
No, I don't. I want to talk a little bit about digging where the ground is soft, because that's kind of a funny thing to say. But Ryan and I have several things in common, and one of those is that we don't shy away from the hard things. We don't shy away from the hard clients. We don't shy away from hard programming, whatever that is. And, that's really not always the easiest or the best way to go. And so digging where the ground is soft just means you don't always have to do the hard things. You don't always have to have the hard clients. Mix it up a little. If you're going to have hard work, then at least have some things in your personal life that are going to be a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit easier for you to accomplish, so that you're not stretched like that.
Yeah. So I want to talk quickly, because I'm aware of time, about supervision, and supervision as a parallel process to the process that we deliver services to our clients. So if you're working in a field and you're hearing a lot of trauma, you're hearing a lot of, even helping in general, you don't even have to hear trauma to be compassion fatigue, because it's a sense of giving. And so I think it's so important that supervisors have specific skills, and there's certain things that I've kind of experienced as a supervisor, what's helpful. And so I kind of have them broken down into what kind of style of supervision it has been very helpful and successful, and what kinds of structure supervision has, so that you can keep people learning. Okay, so I look at supervisors as having four main functions. The first and the most boring, and we all have to do it, is frankly overseeing the work that they do. As a supervisor, I would hope that you want more than just overseeing the work that other people do that you know that they're doing, or hope that they're doing. So, this part is important.
I might say that would be really boring for the supervisee, too.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
So, the second is developing the skills in your employees to move toward getting better at what they do every day. So this is about skill development. Supervisors who are in supervisory positions have, I feel, an obligation, if they're in that position, to develop the skills of your employees. So the idea, I always say in my agency, that if whatever your goal is in life in terms of your career, my job is to help you obtain that. So if you want my job, if that's your career goal, you want my job, well, I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to develop those skills so you can take my job. I hope I have a different job at that time, because I might be a little, annoyed. However, but if that's your career goal, I'm going to be there developing your skills, your leadership skills, your clinical skills, so that you can do that job and do it well, and even try to do it better than I do it. So the other thing, the third thing is pushing people towards their goals. And then the fourth thing about supervisors is your job is to keep people in the business of this, of doing these things, with staying in this profession. That is your job. Your job is also to keep the people that are under you motivated and attentive enough to themselves so they don't burn out and they don't get to a place where they can't function anymore and leave the profession. Like I said before, it's such a tragedy of how much potential is then lost. So if you think about things that I find very helpful in terms of the structure. So on one slide we've got style, and I'm not going to talk as much about that because I want to talk about the structure right now, is that I make it a part of my supervision that I have regular burnout and compassion fatigue checks. I'm checking in with my employees. I want to know that they're taking care of themselves. I'm also going to be aware of, is this person behaving differently than they normally do? So has it been 4 weeks in a row that paperwork has really been not done on time and they're still behind and still behind? When this person always had paperwork done before? Something's going on, and what is that? And I want to be aware of that. And it's not about a punitive type of process. When we're talking about supervision as a parallel process, we want to take the philosophy that we have towards our clients to our employees. So if we're taking a non-judgmental stance towards our clients and looking at where are they at in terms of their change process, we're going to do the same thing with our employees. It's huge to have employee goals and life goals and professional development goals. And these are not the standardized, I will master my paperwork in the next month or next year. These are actually important career goals. Where does this person want to go so that you, as a supervisor, have in mind what skills I need to help this person develop? I set it up in terms of structure as in, when you sit down in front of me, you ask for what you need from me on that particular day. So a supervisor doesn't have to guess what you need, and they don't have to assume, but then you are actually in charge of it. So whatever it is, it means you need validation because you've been working your butt off, and you're not feeling validated by people. Okay, that's what I'm going to get. We might do something else. If you need a skill, I need to know how to approach this person because the way I've been going isn't working so hot. If I need a strategy. I don't know how to do this. If you're doing treatment, this is an exposure exercise. All these things, and then at the end, the supervisor actually asks, "Did you get what you needed from me today?" And the ideal answer is yes. And if it's no, then we got to figure out, okay, what are we going to do in the next week so that we can get that need met? So it's caring in them, caring about your employees. And then you have your supervisees leave with something. So either it's a new skill, it's a new intervention, it's just feeling better. It could be a task or whatever it is. They are then in charge of doing that.
And I just want to interject, especially with new employees, new clinicians.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest things that we have to be mindful of is having realistic expectations. Yes. New clinicians having realistic expectations for themselves. And so while we didn't build this into our slide, I do think checking in, trying to figure out where people think they're doing well, where they don't think they're doing well, what they should have done according to them, that kind of thing, I think is really crucial for a new employee. So, and we have to wrap up because we're like totally out of time here. There are things we can do at the organizational level. Making sure, again, that we're providing clinical supervision, not competing administrative tasks, competing with the clinical supervision. I like to do an annual assessment of the agency or at least the program to get input from the staff. The staff can then have input on strategic planning, but you really want to know what people's feedback is about how things operate, what the processes are. I also like doing the reciprocal performance evals. I think that's really important. Again, this is a reciprocal relationship between supervisor and employee. That's not always easy, but if you're going to do a formal performance eval of the employee, then I think the employee is certainly entitled and should be given the opportunity to give feedback to the supervisor. And then I think, the more abstract, you have to genuinely care about your people. You have to take care of them. And I'm trained as a family therapist, so for me, being at the top is really kind of like being the mom at home. I'm creating that environment, I'm creating that culture in every way that I can so that then my employees can go out and do the work that they want to do and I want them to do. So it's a genuine investment and it's a culture that has to be created, I think. So just the only other thing about that is that I think we oftentimes, before we hit the administrative point, assuming that people even want to go to the administrative point, we don't realize that there's some reciprocity there with the administration. So, when your administrators are doing something big, or your administrators are struggling with a contract, or maybe there's a fundraising activity, support your administrators, support each other in the duties that they're doing. You want them to support your work, but I think the line staff need to know that we need line staff to support the administrators as well, so that there is that much more reciprocity. Did we get it all in?
Well, As much as we can.
Got as much in as you could, considering that you had only an hour instead of 4 days to put
Exactly.
it together. We would encourage people to submit questions using the Questions for Speaker link underneath the video window if you like. Have any questions from the folks with us in the room? Doesn't look like it at this point. We'll pause momentarily here and let's see if there's a question or two rolling in. In the meantime, let people know that our next program is in fact tomorrow afternoon at this same time. We're doing a program on diagnosing personality disorders. Dr. Tom
Should be
Minogue,
colorful.
who has gone around the state with us also doing presentations on DSM-4 TR diagnosis ever since it was just DSM-4 rather than DSM-4 TR. But I do not see questions rolling in at this point. So, Ryan, Nancy, thank you so much.
Thank you for
You're
having
very
us.
You guys did a great job getting it all in.
Thank
See
you,
by the clock
everybody.
on the table that it's almost 2:30 local time. We'll leave the link for the CEU application open for a little while longer, and we'll send it to you in an email as well. And as I said, our next program is tomorrow. Hope you're able to join us for that. We do most of our advertisement via email to keep costs down, so if you want to get your colleagues on our email list, that would be great. You can do that directly through our website. Again, thank you for your time today, and folks, thanks for your time and expertise.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Kelly will cue us out.
you.